feedback. We've heard the term before, but what does it really mean in terms of the human body? Well, feedback really just means that there was some sort of a change that was detected, and we're going to respond as an organism. In the human body, we have our hypothalamus that's going to help us do that. This is all relating back to our body or living organisms trying to maintain what's called homeostasis. Remember, homeostasis means that we're keeping a relatively stable internal environment despite changing environments, whether it be internally inside the organism or externally outside that living thing. Remember, keeping the environment relatively stable means that we're going to have what's called a dynamic equilibrium. In this case, dynamic means that it's really not perfectly flat line constant. We're going to have some ups and we're going to have some downs. We'll have some fluctuation, some changes, but overall the average is going to stay relatively the same. That's our equilibrium part. So if you think of our body temperature and how it changes over time, sometimes we might get a little bit warmer, then we can cool off, eventually we might get warm again, but overall the average temperature stays relatively the same. We have some examples for non-living things, just to kind of give you a way as to how things happen in a non-living situation. Well, think of your house in the winter time. In the winter time, it may be relatively cold outside and you need to have a boiler or a furnace or some way of keeping your house warm. And that's going to bring your room temperature up. Let's say it gets a little bit warmer than what you've set your thermostat to in the house. Let's say you set it to 72 degrees. The boiler goes on, it warms it up, it brings the temperature up to maybe, let's say, 74 degrees. It senses that that temperature has gone up above what we would consider a set point, and it's going to turn the heat off. When it turns the heat off, the room temperature is going to come back down, and then the thermostat is going to sense when that temperature has fallen below the 72 degrees set point. It's going to turn the heat back on. Turning the heat back on is going to bring the room temperature back up, and we're going to continue that cycle. So we'll have some fluctuations over time, but for the most part, we're going to try and keep the temperature as close to 72 as we can. Overall, the outcome is to keep our room temperature in a relatively narrow range. Let's look at an example for living things. Living things also have to maintain body temperature. We know that humans in particular maintain their body temperature, and we need to maintain this homeostasis or balance in body temperature. So let's say we started exercising. We started exercising, and all of that body work, whether it be the muscles and the friction with the muscles, all of our cellular reactions producing heat, is going to bring our body temperature up. As our body temperature goes up, our first response is to let the blood vessels do what's called vasodilate or expand. We know that our blood carries a lot of our heat. So we see that vasodilation in the surface of your skin, turning nice and pink when you exercise and you're very hot. Your face gets very red sometimes. Those are the blood vessels close to the surface of the skin opening up to bring more blood to the surface of the skin to hopefully let out some of that heat. If that doesn't work, our body will begin sweating. As that sweat is on the surface of our skin, as it evaporates, it brings some of the heat with it to cool our body. Essentially, it should bring our body temperature down. Now, we have a set point for body temperature as well. We know for humans it's somewhere around 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit or 37 degrees Celsius. So when that body temperature rises a little too far above that set point, this is when the vasodilation and sweating will occur. It will hopefully bring our body temperature down. However, if our body temperature starts to fall below our set point, we're going to carry the exact opposite out. We're going to constrict or vasoconstrict some of our blood vessels to close them off. We'll close off some of those blood vessels at the surface of our skin, which sometimes you'll notice, especially in the wintertime when you're cold, it'll make the surface of your skin look a little white because you have less blood flow. That'll help to keep the heat more towards the core of your body. And if that doesn't help to bring your body temperature back up, you may start to shiver. As you shiver, it creates friction within your body to create heat, just like clapping your hands together and rubbing them together. And eventually it'll bring our body temperature back up. And we'll continue that whole cycle in order to keep our body temperature relatively stable within the body. This is all an example of something that we call negative feedback. The idea is that the response to the change is opposite. So we detect a change in the environment, and our response is the opposite. So we know that our body temperature has gone up, so we need to be able to bring the body temperature back down. Once that change has been corrected, the response is to stop the signal. That's also where that negative part comes in. The response, when it has fixed the initial issue, is going to shut the original signal down for that change. So in the example of humans, if we were still shivering and our body temperature got up, it would send a signal back, stop shivering, we don't need it anymore, or stop sweating, we've cooled our body off. In the case of plants, we also have an example of homeostasis and maintaining that dynamic equilibrium in terms of water balance. Plants have certain structures on the lower surface of their leaves in the lower epidermis called stomata and guard cells. Those stomata are special pores or holes on the underside of the leaf, and they are each surrounded by a pair of guard cells. In this situation, we show guard cells being turgid. We have water that has flown into the cells, and it almost makes them like those funky balloons that you see clowns blowing up. And as it does, the stoma is open, or that pore is open. This allows us to bring in carbon dioxide, it lets oxygen out, and it also lets water vapor out. Now remember, in terms of plants, they don't take in water through their leaves. Their primary way of gaining water is through the roots in the soil. So remember, the water is actually going in through the roots, and it'll be transported to the leaves via small tubes. We have our xylem that transports water. So in the case of our guard cells being turgid and full of water, the stoma are going to be open. In the terms of the guard cells being flaccid or kind of flabby, think of these balloons possibly getting deflated, the stoma is closed. So it has now closed that pore. However, it stays open enough for photosynthesis, but not open too much that we would lose too much water. So in this particular situation, we might have this happening at night or on a day that's very, very sunny. When do you think the stoma might be open? The stoma could be open during the daytime when we have sunlight and not too hot, not a situation where we'd be losing too much water, and this would allow more of this reaction to occur, to let more carbon dioxide in, more carbon dioxide out, and even maybe possibly some extra water. So in this case, this is one way that the cells can respond in order to maintain water balance. It can open and close these stomates in order to conserve some water so that they don't lose too much water on a very hot, sunny day. We have other organisms that live in different parts of the world that have even further adaptations, like a cactus, in order to conserve water. There is another type of feedback that's used in living organisms, and in humans it's not used very frequently because it's very difficult to control. And it's called positive feedback. Remember, the other type of feedback we did was called negative feedback. This one now is called positive feedback, and it's the response is to amplify the change. So in this case, we have a change in the environment that gets detected, and we have a response, and that response grows stronger and stronger over time in order to hopefully correct the change in the environment sometimes. Unfortunately, though, it doesn't maintain homeostasis well at all. It's really more of a temporary situation, and we need to return to normal. This is usually more of, I don't want to say a disease state, but an abnormal state. So we know of only a few examples in the human body that use positive feedback because it is something that is very difficult to maintain homeostasis with. So some examples are during childbirth. During childbirth, as the fetus starts to enter the birth canal, it sends signals that it has entered the birth canal to increase the strength of the contractions. And the more the fetus starts to enter the birth canal, the stronger the contractions get until child labor is over and then the contractions end. The difficulty is that the contractions get stronger and stronger and stronger until the situation has corrected itself. The child is born. We also have positive feedback during blood clotting. This is a way to hopefully preserve some homeostasis. If you've cut yourself, your body has sensed that there is a cut, and it's going to send a signal to clot the blood in that particular area. The response gets stronger and stronger until the blood has stopped getting released through the cut. Now the issue is if it doesn't stop it and your blood continues to clot, we can end up having some bigger problems in our body, because if we continue to have blood clots forming throughout our bloodstream, we can actually have a blockage. So you can see that this is one that we wouldn't want to have happen on a regular basis because it is very difficult to control. Another situation is during lactation. When a mammal has an offspring, it will produce milk, and as that offspring starts to nurse, it sends a signal to release the milk and to produce more milk, and it gets stronger and stronger as the animal nurses. Fever is another one with positive feedback. Your body senses that there's a problem, and it can produce a fever and raise the temperature of your body and raise that set point in order to hopefully kill off any invaders. And it also increases the rate of your chemical reactions. We know that if a fever gets way too high, though, it can actually start to damage some of our proteins and denature the proteins, which is another one we need to get under control. That's it for feedback today.